In an earlier video, we explained that we could be facing the largest humanitarian crisis we have seen in human history, a sexual holocaust. The sexual holocaust is a multidimensional global crisis stemming from unrestrained sexual behaviors that have resulted in profound harm to humanity. We explained that unrestrained sexuality has affected all aspects of our humanity: the physical, emotional, social, and spiritual. In an earlier video, we discussed the physical, emotional, and social harms caused by anything goes sexuality. In this final video, we are going to explore the spiritual harms caused by anything goes sexuality. The majority of people today identify with a specific religion, and most of those who do not still consider themselves spiritual. So it's safe to say we need to consider the effect of anything goes sexuality on our spiritual lives. Anything goes sexuality leads to vain and false identities. Today, the surge of false and vain identities can be viewed as a result of humanity's desperate search for true personal worth or value. Anything goes sexuality turns people into objects. We typically only feel valuable if we get affirmation from others. Let's imagine for a minute that as humans, our identity comes from God. If humans were created in the image of God and are loved by God, then we would have value simply because God chose to give us life. This type of identity would be available to all humanity and would not require the affirmation we get from others. Many people reject this view simply because with this identity comes responsibility. If God made us in His image, shouldn't we act like it? That might mean that sometimes we would need to restrain ourselves. Anything goes sexuality teaches that people are only as valuable as what they can give to others. Instead, our true value comes from who we were created to be, men and women created in God's image. Anything goes sexuality leads to guilt and shame. The inherent guilt that is associated with unrestrained sexual behaviors arises from our conscience and warns us of the multiple harms caused by anything goes sexuality. In other words, our sense of guilt is an indicator that a certain behavior is wrong or harmful. But where did guilt come from? Why do we feel shame when we have done something wrong? Maybe guilt is an indicator that sexuality was designed to work a specific way. Imagine for a moment you were God and wanted people to be happy, healthy, and whole. How would you help guide them? Would you prick their conscience so that they might make healthy choices? Maybe God gave us guilt to help us navigate the way sexuality is supposed to work. But as we all know, we can choose to ignore our conscience. The more we normalize irresponsible behaviors in our culture and in our individual lives, the less guilt we feel. Without acknowledging that some behaviors are wrong and harmful, how can we live healthy, whole lives? When we make a mistake, how can we be forgiven if we don't feel sorry for what we've done? Victimizers are people who promote unrestrained sexuality. Today, there are victimizers in the government, educational institutions, and the media. Many industries and institutions are trying to normalize unrestrained sexual behaviors to reduce guilt. The less guilty we feel, the more they can exploit our desires. If we have any chance of stopping the sexual holocaust, we must first stop the victimizers. Anything goes sexuality is destroying true love. Today, love is equated to affirmation, attraction, or affection. Obviously, not all things should be affirmed. Likewise, attraction and affection come and go. These definitions of love miss the mark. Anything goes sexuality took the traditional definition of love and turned it on its head. Instead of putting God and others first, people are putting themselves first. Unrestrained sexuality has seduced us into thinking that personal restraint is a bad thing. Our hearts are not in the right place, and therefore it is easy to be persuaded that personal rights should triumph over personal responsibilities. True love is not about self. True love is willing to be restrained because true love puts God and others first. This is the kind of love history tells us Jesus demonstrated. Anything goes sexuality has eternal consequences. What does it mean to be human? A large part of the answer to that question has to do with our free will. To be human is to be able to choose between good and evil. Today, it does not seem like many people live by any universal moral code. Instead, much of the world teeters between nihilism and some form of self-made morality. For example, if you ask individuals if child molesters or mass murderers should be punished in the next life, most people will say yes. But when asked about themselves personally, they try to slip out the back door of the conversation by denying that there is any standard by which they should be judged. We have spent an entire series of videos talking about the different ways that humans have been hurting each other. At some level, we all want to see justice done for the wrongs we have witnessed or have experienced. But justice is meaningless if there is not a universal moral standard to which we are all accountable. In this series, we have addressed very real and heartbreaking issues that need our attention. Unrestrained sexuality has created billions of victims, and it is being promoted by countless victimizers. Our global society has been ignoring the effects of unrestrained sexuality for the past few decades. It's time we wake up and see that the sexual revolution did not lead to sexual liberation. It led to a sexual holocaust. We need to rise up. It is time for us to come out of this darkness and step into the light.